The old man's hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the bruise spreading dark beneath his shirt, a bruise no one at the facility had bothered to explain. He'd been wandering the highway shoulder for over an hour before the first engine slowed down, then another, then 40 more. By noon, 400 motorcycles filled the lawn of the place that was supposed to protect him, engines silent, riders standing shoulder to shoulder, refusing to leave until someone finally listened. What they uncovered inside those walls would end one man's career, expose a pattern nobody wanted to admit, and give a 78-year-old man something he thought he'd lost forever: people willing to stop for him. The fog hadn't lifted off Route 42 yet when Samuel Whitfield stepped onto the gravel shoulder in his slippers. He was 78 years old, and for most of those years he had known exactly where he was standing. He had known the smell of diesel and the particular squeal of a '68 Harley clutch plate that needed replacing. He had known his wife Dorothy's laugh, the one that came out sideways when she thought something was truly funny. He had known the sound of his own garage door, the one he'd installed himself in 1979, the one that stuck a little on humid mornings. He did not know where he was now. The cold bit through his flannel pajama shirt. His chest ached, a deep, spreading soreness beneath his ribs that made him wince with every breath. He didn't remember how he'd gotten the bruises. He didn't remember much of anything since Tuesday, or what he thought was Tuesday. Days had a way of folding into each other lately, like pages of a book stuck together with something sweet and forgotten. Samuel had spent 41 years running Whitfield's auto and cycle repair out of a cinder-block garage on the edge of Loudonville, Ohio. Men used to drive 2 counties over just to have him listen to their engines, because he could diagnose a problem by ear the way other men diagnosed problems by computer. Dorothy used to bring him coffee at 10 every morning without being asked, and their son David used to sit on an overturned bucket and watch his father work, asking questions until Samuel ran out of answers. Dorothy had been gone 6 years now. David lived in Columbus and called on birthdays mostly. Samuel had sold the garage 2 years ago when his hands started forgetting which tool came next. He had moved, reluctantly, into Maple Ridge Senior Living, a beige building off Route 60 with fluorescent lights that hummed all night, and aides who called him Hon without knowing his name. He didn't remember leaving Maple Ridge. He remembered a hallway. He remembered a door that wasn't locked when it should have been. He remembered walking because walking felt like the only thing that made sense, the only thing his legs still understood how to do without being told twice. Now the sun was coming up grey over the tree line, and 18-wheelers were starting to rumble past close enough that the wind off them nearly knocked him down. He stood at the edge of the northbound lane in his slippers, one sock fallen around his ankle, blinking at a landscape that all at once seemed too wide and too empty. A bruise had bloomed dark purple across his sternum, visible where his top button had come undone. He touched it and hissed. He couldn't remember hitting anything. He couldn't remember much of anything except a raised voice, somewhere in his memory, sharp and impatient, telling him to sit down and stop being difficult. He did not know that voice belonged to Gary Hensley, the overnight aide at Maple Ridge, who had grabbed him hard by the collarbone 3 nights running when Samuel wouldn't settle, who had shoved him back into his recliner with more force than any 78-year-old chest could safely take, who logged nothing, reported nothing, and assumed, correctly for a while, that a confused old man's complaints would never be believed over a staff member's paperwork. Samuel didn't know any of that. He only knew his chest hurt, and he was cold, and somewhere behind him was a building that didn't feel like anywhere he belonged. And somewhere ahead of him, maybe, was the sound of his own garage door catching on its humid morning hinge, if only he kept walking long enough to find it. A horn blared. He startled backward, nearly losing his footing in the gravel. That was when he heard the engines, not trucks, not cars. A low, rolling growl that grew from a murmur to a wall of sound, dozens of motorcycles cresting the rise on Route 42 in a loose formation, chrome catching the weak morning light. Samuel turned toward the noise, the way a man turns toward something half-remembered, some old recognition stirring behind his eyes. Dorothy's voice decades ago, teasing him. "You'd rather work on those bikes than dance with me, wouldn't you?" The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man on a matte black Road King, spotted the old man standing alone on the shoulder in his pajamas and slippers, swaying slightly, one hand pressed to his own chest, and felt something in his gut go cold and certain all at once. Adam Coleman had ridden Route 42 1,000 times. He had never once seen anything like this. He raised his left hand, the signal to slow, and behind him 40-some engines dropped their pitch in unison, gravel crunching as the whole formation eased toward the shoulder. Adam swung his leg over his bike before it had even fully stopped rolling. "Sir!" He kept his voice low, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. "Sir, you okay out here?" Samuel blinked at him. Up close, the old man's eyes were pale blue and searching, flicking over Adam's leather cut, his grey beard, the patches on his vest. Iron Brotherhood MC, Ashland chapter, as though trying to place him in some filing system that had lost half its drawers. "I'm looking for my garage," Samuel said finally, his voice thin but steady. "I had a garage, right around here somewhere." Adam glanced down and saw the bruise darkening above the old man's collar, the trembling in his bare, sockless foot against the cold gravel, and something in his chest tightened like a fist. "Okay," Adam said gently, already reaching for the radio clipped to his vest. "Okay, sir, we're going to help you find it." Behind him, 40 motorcycles idled on the shoulder of Route 42, engines ticking in the cold, waiting. It would take less than 6 hours for that number to become 400. Adam Coleman had been riding with the Iron Brotherhood for 19 years, and in that time he had learned one law above all others. You did not leave a man behind, and you did not leave a man exposed. It didn't matter if the man was a brother in leather or a stranger in pajama pants standing barefoot on a highway shoulder. The law held. "Rachel," he said into his radio, "I need you up here, now." Rachel Doyle had been the Iron Brotherhood's unofficial road medic for 6 years, ever since her ER shifts at Ashland County Medical started overlapping with weekend rides. She arrived within 4 minutes, dropping her kickstand before the bike had fully stopped, medical bag already swinging off her shoulder. She knelt in front of Samuel on the gravel, and her trained eyes moved fast, pupils, color, breathing, the bruise spreading dark and deliberate above his heart. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" "Samuel," he said. "Samuel Whitfield." A pause, his brow furrowing with the effort. "I had a garage, Whitfield's." "That bruise on your chest, Samuel. Do you know how you got it?" He shook his head slowly, and something about the way he did it, not confused exactly, but guarded, like a man circling a memory he didn't want to touch, made Rachel's jaw tighten. "That's not a fall bruise," she said quietly to Adam, standing. "That's a grip. Somebody's fingers right along the collarbone and sternum, fresh too, 24-48 hours. Adam's face went hard and still. "Somebody hurt him." "Somebody's been hurting him," Rachel corrected. "This isn't the first time. There's yellowing bruising underneath the fresh stuff. This has happened more than once." Nicholas Farrow, the club's road captain, had already pulled his phone and was running the description through the missing persons hotline, while 3 other riders fanned out along the shoulder to slow traffic and keep the old man from the truck lanes. It took 11 minutes to get an answer. "Maple Ridge Senior Living," Nicholas called out, jogging back. "Reported a resident missing 40 minutes ago. Samuel Whitfield, 78, that's him." 40 minutes, Adam repeated. "He's been out here since before dawn. Nobody noticed for 40 minutes? Rachel's mouth was a thin line. "We need to get him warm and checked out, but Adam, those bruises need to go on record before anybody at that facility has a chance to explain them away." Adam looked down at Samuel, who had gone quiet, watching the exchange with the wary patience of a man used to being talked over rather than talked to. "Mr. Whitfield," Adam said, crouching to the old man's eye level, "we're going to get you warm and get that chest looked at by a real doctor. Is that all right with you?" Samuel studied him for a long moment. "You've got grease under your nails," he said finally, nodding at Adam's hands. "Real mechanic or just Sunday rider?" Adam allowed himself a small, surprised smile. 22 years turning wrenches, sir. Still do it on the side." Something in Samuel's shoulders eased, just slightly, at that answer, as though it had settled some private test. "All right then," he said. "All right." They wrapped him in a spare riding jacket 3 sizes too big and got him into Rachel's truck, which she'd radioed a nearby member to bring up. Adam rode escort behind it himself, all the way to Ashland County Medical, while Nicholas stayed back to coordinate. At the hospital, the story got worse before it got better. The attending physician, Dr. Patel, documented 6 distinct bruises across Samuel's torso and upper arms, in various stages of healing, along with a hairline fracture in his left wrist that had never been set. "This is consistent with repeated physical restraint," she told Rachel and Adam quietly, out of Samuel's earshot. "Aggressive restraint, not gentle redirection. I'm required to report this to Adult Protective Services, and I intend to." "Good," Adam said, "because we intend to make sure somebody's listening." By the time Samuel was settled in a hospital bed, warm and fed and drowsing under a blanket that actually fit him, word had already spread through the Iron Brotherhood's phone tree. A network built over 2 decades of poker runs and charity rides and funeral processions for fallen members. Elderly man abandoned on Route 42, bruised, neglected by his care facility, no family present. The message needed no embellishment. It traveled on its own weight. Victoria Hale, who ran the Brotherhood's community outreach and had buried her own father after a nursing home scandal 8 years back, was the one who posted it to the club's page with a single line: "This ends today. Who's riding to Maple Ridge?" By noon, 40 riders had become 120. By 2 o'clock, chapters from 3 counties over were confirming their route. Adam sat beside Samuel's hospital bed as the old man slept and thought about his own father, gone 9 years now, who had spent his final months in a facility not unlike Maple Ridge. Quiet, understaffed, easy to overlook. Adam hadn't known back then how to fight for him. He'd been 26 and grieving and too intimidated by clipboards and liability waivers to ask the right questions. He was not 26 anymore. "You're not going back there alone," Adam said quietly to the sleeping man, though Samuel couldn't hear him. "Not ever again." Outside the hospital window in the parking lot, motorcycles were already beginning to arrive in 2s and 3s, engines cutting off one after another until the lot had gone strangely purposefully quiet. The calm before 400 men and women decided together that a stranger's chest bruises were their business now. Samuel woke at dusk to the sound of a television turned low and a stranger's shape in the chair beside his bed. For one disoriented moment, he thought it was David, his son, and something in his chest lifted painfully with hope before his vision cleared and he saw the leather vest, the grey beard, the patches. "You're still here," Samuel said, his voice raspy. "Told you I would be," Adam said. Samuel shifted, wincing at the pull in his ribs, and looked toward the window. Even through the blinds, he could make out shapes in the lot below. Dozens of them, unmoving, silent, standing beside their bikes like sentries. "What are all those people doing out there?" "Waiting," Adam said simply. "Making sure you know you're not alone in this." Samuel's eyes glistened, and he looked away quickly, embarrassed, the way men of his generation often were by their own tears. "I don't need a fuss made," he muttered. "I'm an old man who wandered off. Happens to plenty of folks my age." "You didn't wander off, Samuel." Adam kept his voice even, careful. "Dr. Patel found 6 bruises. A cracked wrist that never got set. That's not confusion. That's somebody putting their hands on you harder than they had any right to. Samuel was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone smaller. There's a fella works nights. Gary. Doesn't like it when I don't settle down easy. Grabs me sometimes. Told me nobody'd believe an old man with a fuzzy memory over a man with a clipboard. He swallowed. Didn't figure anybody would either. Adam's hands curled into fists on his knees, slow and deliberate, and he made himself breathe before he spoke again. I believe you, he said, and there's about 200 people outside this window who are going to believe you too, whether Maple Ridge likes it or not. That number would be closer to 400 within the day. But first came the harder part, the part that had nothing to do with engines or leather vests and everything to do with paperwork, liability lawyers, and an administrator named Denise Faraday, who met Rachel and Nicholas in the Maple Ridge lobby the next morning with a rehearsed, apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. We take these allegations very seriously, Faraday said, hands folded. But I'd caution against jumping to conclusions based on the account of a resident with documented cognitive decline. Doctor's report says otherwise, Nicholas said flatly, sliding the discharge paperwork across the desk. 6 bruises, old and new. Unset fracture. That's not cognitive decline, ma'am, that's a pattern. I'll need to review our internal logs before... Your internal logs, Rachel cut in, show 0 incident reports for Samuel Whitfield in the last 4 months, despite a hospital chart that says otherwise. Somebody wasn't filing paperwork, Ms. Faraday. That's either negligence or a cover-up, and either way, Adult Protective Services already has the referral. Faraday's composure cracked, just slightly, at the mention of APS. I'd like to speak with our attorney before this goes any further. You do that, Nicholas said, standing. We'll be outside. It was there in the parking lot of Maple Ridge Senior Living that Adam Coleman felt the first flicker of doubt he'd had since Route 42. Not doubt that Samuel deserved protection, that was never in question, but doubt about whether 400 motorcycles rolling into a quiet retirement community's driveway would look to the outside world like justice or like intimidation. He knew how bikers were seen by people who'd never ridden with one. He knew the headlines that could come from this if it went sideways. Motorcycle gang descends on nursing home, twisting a rescue into a threat. He said as much to Victoria that evening as members set up folding chairs and coffee urns in the Brotherhood's clubhouse, planning the next day's ride. You think we shouldn't go? Victoria asked, arms crossed. I think we need to go right, Adam said, not as a mob, as a wall. We stand. We don't shout. We don't give anybody a photograph they can use against him, or against us. He looked around the room at the riders gathering, young and old, some in Brotherhood colours, some from clubs 3 counties over who'd heard the story and simply shown up. Samuel spent his whole life fixing things quietly, with his hands, without needing anybody's permission. We're not going to save him by making noise. We're going to save him by not moving until somebody does right by him. Nicholas nodded slowly. A wall, not a riot. 400 people standing still, Adam said, is louder than 400 people shouting ever could be. Across town, in his hospital bed, Samuel Whitfield lay awake long after the nurses had dimmed the lights, staring at the ceiling, turning Adam's words over in his mind, "You're not going back there alone," and felt, for the first time since Dorothy died, something unclench in his chest that had nothing to do with Bruises at all. By 7 the next morning, the front lawn of Maple Ridge Senior Living had become something the local news would later struggle to describe. 400 motorcycles stood in silent, precise rows along the circular drive and spilling onto the shoulder of Route 60, engines off, riders standing beside them in a loose but unbroken line that stretched from the front entrance to the parking lot's edge. Nobody shouted, nobody revved an engine for show. They simply stood, a wall of leather and quiet resolve, facing the glass doors of the building where Samuel Whitfield had spent 2 years being systematically unheard. Denise Faraday arrived to find her own parking lot unreachable, her morning staff meeting cancelled by circumstance, and a local news van already setting up on the far curb. Inside the clubhouse the night before, Adam had made one thing clear to every rider who showed up: no threats, no trespassing, no raised voices. Just presence, just the unshakable fact of 400 people who refused to look away. It worked exactly as he'd hoped it would. By 9 a.m., Adult Protective Services investigator Marcus Webb arrived on scene, and the sheer size of the crowd, orderly, silent, undeniably serious, made clear that this was not a case anyone could quietly bury in paperwork. Webb interviewed Faraday inside, while, outside, reporters moved down the line of riders asking questions that most of them answered the same simple way. "We're here for Samuel," Victoria told a reporter, her voice steady. "That's the whole story. A man got hurt by the people paid to protect him, and we're not leaving until somebody official says that matters." By 11, Gary Hensley, the overnight aide, was called in for questioning. By noon, under the weight of a hospital report, 4 other residents' families coming forward with similar concerns once the story broke, and the impossibility of ignoring the crowd outside, Maple Ridge's corporate office suspended Hensley pending investigation and opened a formal review of the facility's entire overnight staff. Rachel brought Samuel back to Maple Ridge that afternoon, not to stay, but to collect his belongings, at his own insistence. "I want to see it," he told her. "I want to walk out of there on my own 2 feet, not carried out like I don't matter." When the hospital transport pulled into the drive, 400 engines came alive at once, not in celebration, not in noise for noise's sake, but as a low, rolling salute, the kind bikers gave at funerals and homecomings alike, a sound Samuel felt in his chest before he understood what it meant. Adam met him at the car door and offered his arm. Samuel took it, and together they walked the short distance to the entrance, flanked on both sides by rows of riders who had stood in the cold for 6 hours without complaint, watching a stranger they'd known for barely a day being restored, piece by piece, to his own dignity. Inside, gathering the small collection of photographs and Dorothy's old sweater from his room, Samuel paused at the doorway and looked back at Adam. "Why?" he asked simply. "You didn't know me from Adam." He caught his own joke a half-second late and gave a small, surprised laugh, the first real laugh anyone had heard from him in days. Adam smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Because somebody should have stopped for my father once, and nobody did. I couldn't go back and fix that, but I could stop for you." Samuel's hand tightened just slightly on the older man's photograph he was holding, Dorothy, laughing sideways, 40 years younger, forever. "Well," he said quietly, "you did." Outside, as the sun broke fully through the fog for the first time in 3 days, 400 engines idled together in the drive, waiting to escort one old man wherever he decided to go next. And for the first time since he'd stepped onto the shoulder of Route 42 in his slippers, Samuel Whitfield knew exactly where that would be. The investigation into Maple Ridge Senior Living took 4 months to conclude. Gary Hensley was terminated and later faced criminal charges for elder abuse. The facility itself was placed under a corrective action plan by the state, with mandated camera coverage in every common area and quarterly welfare checks conducted by an outside agency. 3 other families, emboldened by Samuel's case, came forward with their own accounts, and Adult Protective Services investigator Marcus Webb would later call it one of the most consequential single reports of his 14-year career. Not because of the paperwork, he said, but because of the 400 witnesses standing in a parking lot who made sure that paperwork actually got read. Samuel Whitfield did not return to Maple Ridge or to any facility like it. He moved instead into the small guest house behind Adam Coleman's property outside Loudonville. Adam's idea floated hesitantly at first over coffee in the hospital cafeteria the week Samuel was discharged. "I've got the space," Adam had said, "and frankly, sir, I could use somebody around who actually knows what he's doing under a hood. My nephew's about as useful with a wrench as a screen door on a submarine." Samuel had laughed, really laughed, the kind that came out sideways, the kind Dorothy used to make, and said he'd think about it. He'd said yes within the week. By spring, the old cinder-block building that had once housed Whitfield's auto and cycle repair reopened its doors, this time as a joint venture. Samuel teaching, slow and patient, and a rotating crew of Iron Brotherhood members learning to turn wrenches under a man who could diagnose an engine problem by ear before most people even noticed something was wrong. Nicholas Farrow turned out to have a natural gift for it. Victoria brought her teenage daughter by on weekends, and Samuel taught the girl to change her own oil with a patience he hadn't known he still had in him. David, Samuel's son, drove up from Columbus more often now. Guilt at first, Samuel suspected, and then something more genuine as the months went on, as David watched his father laughing in a garage full of leather-clad strangers who had somehow become family faster than blood ever had. "I should have checked on you more," David admitted one Sunday, watching his father explain torque specifications to a rapt audience of 3 bikers twice his size. "I didn't know. I should have known." "You know now," Samuel told him simply. "That's what matters." Rachel stopped by weekly to check the fading yellow-green shadow of a bruise that had long since healed. Though she suspected she came mostly for the coffee Samuel insisted on making, exactly the way Dorothy used to, at 10 o'clock sharp, whether anyone asked for it or not. Adam kept a photograph on the wall of the garage office now, not of a motorcycle, not of a club run, but of 400 bikes parked in silent rows on the lawn of Maple Ridge on a cold morning in early spring, taken by a local reporter who'd later say it was the most important photograph of her career. Beneath it, in Samuel's own shaky handwriting, was a small card. "Sometimes the family you need is the one that stops." On the 1-year anniversary of the day he'd stood shivering on the shoulder of Route 42, Samuel Whitfield stood instead in the doorway of his reopened garage, coffee in hand, watching a new generation of riders roll in for a Saturday morning of engine work and easy conversation. His chest didn't ache anymore, not from old bruises, long faded, and not from the loneliness that had settled into it for 2 hard years before that. He thought of Dorothy sometimes, still in the particular slant of afternoon light through the garage windows. He thought less now of the cold morning on the highway, and more of what had come after. 400 strangers who had decided, without needing to be asked twice, that an old man alone on a highway was worth stopping for. Adam pulled up on his Road King just as the coffee finished brewing, cutting the engine and grinning at the old man in the doorway. "Morning, boss," he said. Samuel poured him a cup, steady-handed, unhurried, exactly at 10 o'clock. "Morning," he said. "Now get in here. That clutch plate on Nicholas's bike isn't going to fix itself." Behind them, engines rumbled to life across the lot, one after another, the same sound that had once saved him now simply the sound of an ordinary Saturday, the sound, Samuel had come to understand, of a family that never stopped showing up.